Okay, so in this video, I'm going to quickly review some of the key points I made in my last video. In my last video, I mentioned that in previous noun complement videos that I discovered an association between the adjective used as a noun complement and the distinction phrase or clause used as a noun complement. In other words, I saw an association, kind of a connection thing, all right? Then I made the claim in my previous video that I think the prepositional phrase has an association with the distinction phrase or clause. Now, this is what you would probably call a relative clause, but I don't use that term, all right? So I've shown then that there's an association here between these two and between these two, but I'd like to review that. Now, as I mentioned, the distinction phrase or clause used as a noun complement is associated with the adjective or adjective phrase used as a noun complement. And here's an example, a very simple example. The book that is blue is damaged. So here you see the distinction phrase, okay? That's the structure. It's a distinction phrase, all right? But it's functioning as a noun complement. You've seen that many times in my previous videos. All right, so you make a transformation here, kind of a conversion, and you can say the blue book is damaged. In other words, the distinction phrase is replaced with a simple adjective. The blue book is damaged. And that adjective, which is what I call a basic or base sentence element, is functioning as a noun complement. In one of my previous videos, you'll see that I refer to this as a base element, or you would call it a part of speech, okay? So in my last video, the previous one, I made the claim, or I stated the premise that the distinction phrase or clause used as a noun complement has an association with the prepositional phrase used as a noun complement. So let's look at the example that I gave. The Jimmy Green who heads a major corporation in San Diego is way more serious than the Jimmy Green who plays golf in Lake Tahoe. Okay, so here you have a full, complete thought here, all in one sentence. And you see there are two Jimmy Greens. And you see there's two distinction phrases. There's the one that states who heads a major corporation in San Diego. So that's a distinction phrase, all right, the structure, but it's functioning as a noun complement. And then down here you see the other Jimmy Green who plays golf in Lake Tahoe. So who plays golf in Lake Tahoe is your distinction phrase, or you'd probably call it a relative clause, all right? But that structure is functioning as a noun complement. All right, so here you see the example I gave in the previous video. But then we did kind of a transformation and conversion here, all right? Now we have, in simplified form, the Jimmy Green in San Diego is way more serious than the Jimmy Green in Lake Tahoe, okay? So now we have a situation where quite a few words were omitted. And when you omit things, you have a situation which I call elliptical, okay? In other words, this deep thought here, this complete thought, this full thought, was reduced to this simpler version here, all right? So ultimately, what did we discover? What did we discover in this study, in these two videos, 16a and 16b? Well, we see that the association is clear. There is an association between the distinction phrase or clause used as a noun complement with the prepositional phrase used as a noun complement. There's clearly a connection here. We just saw it. In fact, we see that the prepositional phrase is embedded within the distinction phrase. All right, and all we did was we pulled it out and we put it in this new revised sentence, this simplified, more concise sentence. Because the audience hearing this, they know that the speaker's actually saying this. You see, they know that. So we see that the association is clear. And what else happened here? Well, when we went from this to this, okay, we saw a level change. We went from a deep, or you could say detailed discourse or moment of speech to a more surface or minimal level. In other words, it's not as full, it's not as complete, but it still makes its point, all right? So we had a clear association, we saw level change, and then also we saw a level or state of structure change here. And what that means is, in my system of thinking with sentences, all right, I have the three levels: genuine, synthetic, and elliptical. And you see here that we went from genuine, full and complete, all right, can stand alone. We went to elliptical, all right. The elliptical structure can stand alone, but many words have been omitted. That's why I call it elliptical. Many words have been omitted, but it still makes sense and it still has meaning, okay? So basically, we had a conversion here from genuine to elliptical. You can review this in my other videos, right? And then finally, a really neat thing is we discovered that there's a difference between concrete and abstract, okay? Now you say, well, what do you mean? Well, what's abstract about this? Well, it looks as though when we read this, that we could possibly be talking about two Jimmy Greens, right? No, we're not talking about two Jimmy Greens here. If we're speaking in concrete terms, real, solid things, this could be two real, concrete, different Jimmy Greens, okay? That's what that could mean in the concrete sense. But what about the abstract sense? Well, when we talk about the abstract sense, we have to keep in mind that in my previous videos, I stressed the importance of commas and context. So let's look at a previous example when I talked about noun complements. All right, here's two examples here. I talked about Bob the barber, all right, and I said Bob the barber is almost bald. Then I showed you that Bob the electrician has long blonde hair. Now you see there's no commas in these sentences here. So we see then clearly that this is a noun complement. We're distinguishing this concrete Bob, this real Bob, who's a barber, we're distinguishing him from Bob the electrician. He's a whole different separate person. So you see we're comparing two concrete human beings here, and we're using noun complements, but we're showing how important that noun complement is to distinguish the two, right? Now, keeping in mind what I just said, someone might read this sentence here and think that there are two different, separate, unique Jimmy Greens, all right? Two different concrete Jimmy Greens, but there isn't. There's only one Jimmy Green, and that's why I mentioned that commas and context are very important. We don't see any commas in this sentence here. So we have to use our good brains, and we have to, at some point, realize that, oh, this is abstract. This is abstract. There's only one Jimmy Green. Well, how can that be? Well, the Jimmy Green in San Diego is a Jimmy who's putting on a different face or assuming a different personality than the Jimmy Green who plays golf at Lake Tahoe. In other words, the Jimmy Green, the head of this big corporation, is a serious, strict, hard-working, industrious man. He's a successful man. He's a great guy as far as leadership goes. But the Jimmy Green who steps onto the golf course is a funny guy who jokes around, makes everybody laugh. He's just great company. So it's not two different concrete Jimmys. It's an abstract. It's one Jimmy who just puts on different faces. And that's all it is. And that's where we discover the difference between concrete and abstract. Okay? And I mentioned that more than once because you see here with the noun complement, with the two Bob examples, that there actually were two different concrete Bobs here. So that's why context is very important. Context and commas. And that was the whole point of making these two videos. So there you have it. I think that pretty well covers the proof that there is definitely an association, a connection between the distinction phrase or clause used as a noun complement and the prepositional phrase used as a noun complement. So I hope that's useful information for somebody out there who really, really likes grammar. And again, thanks for being incredibly patient, and good night.